15:35 or beyond that even, and it's time for a panel discussion on history and future cooperation to improve the Baltic Sea. Again, I'm Joakim Ekman. I'm at Södertörn University, which presently hosts the Swedish National Center of the Baltic University Program. And today we have two researchers or participants in the panel discussion, and I will briefly introduce both of them. To begin with, we have Professor Gilek at the School of National Sciences, Technology and Environmental Studies at Södertörn University. Professor Michael Gilek does research on marine environmental governance in the Baltic Sea, and he's also interested in science policy interactions. For example, he has focused on the way we set up goals for sustainable development and to counteract environmental problems on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's a lack of political decisions in order to reach these goals. So I think that's a very important research that Gilek carries out. We also have Associate Professor Kazimierz Musiał here with us at the Institute of Scandinavian Studies at the University of Gdansk. And Kazimierz Musiał is an expert on policy and international cooperation in the Baltic Sea region. He's written extensively on knowledge production, higher education, and internationalization in the region. So I'm very happy to have him here as well. So I will start this panel discussion by asking a few questions to both of our guests, for our participants. And I would like to begin with a retrospective question. Looking back at the past 30 years now, from your perspectives as researchers, how would you say that one should describe this entire period? Is it a matter of a success story, or is it sort of a lost opportunity, or is it something altogether? I mean, how would you describe it from your point of view as researcher in your specific fields? You should both answer that question, but Mikael, you could perhaps start.
Okay, thank you. I hope you hear me.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Joakim. I'd like to thank Lena and Anna, sorry, for your great presentations. I'd like to say also that I'm a former student of Lena, and I think actually I participated at one of these first activities of this program when I was a PhD student. Hello, Lena, long time. Yes, I think, I mean, to be honest, I mean, is it a success or is it a lost opportunity? I guess our previous presenters said a lot about this. And obviously it's a yes and but a no type of answer. It's not black or white, it's sort of gray. To a large extent, I think it's, I mean, it is a success if we look at you know, in an international comparison. The Baltic Sea is a front runner in terms of setting up governance systems. We have built up a science system that has found a lot of problems. There has been development of advice that policies has been adapted around, and there has been management. And the classical examples there are like DDT, PCBs that Lena mentioned, but also in part eutrophication, I think, is, as far as I understand, what the natural scientists are saying is pointing in slowly in the right direction. But obviously on the gray or dark side, there are substantial gaps that also were mentioned. But often in policy, we set up very ambitious goals. And usually there is a gap, even for eutrophication, especially so for getting a no pollution in the sea. But I think if we look at the Swedish environmental quality objectives, the common picture is that we don't reach the goals that we set up, at least not in the time frame that has been put up. So there's a combination of a quite substantial delay in reaching the goals, and in some cases severe problems to take those actions necessary. One example there is perhaps chemicals, where quite a lot of the problem nowadays, as Lena mentioned, is international. So there is a need to enforce global action. We can't sort it out in Sweden or the other Baltic states on our own. So yeah, black and white. In our research, we also pick up some things in the governance system that we think are not fully in line with what ultimately is needed in order to cope with these wicked problems that Anna mentioned. And we talk about broad knowledge production, so that is linked to interdisciplinarity and consideration of a wide set of knowledge producers that are important. Precaution is something we've talked about for ages, because of these things are ultimately uncertain, but it's terribly hard to really implement precaution in a concerted and common manner. Aspects of coordination and integrating over policy fields is usually complex and problematic. Deliberation and communication is often limited to consultation, which does not always is not sufficient to cope with issues that are fundamentally characterized by different values and interests. I hope that answers your question to some extent, but that's what I have for now.
Okay, well, that's perfectly fine. So black and white, so to speak. Kazimierz, then, from your perspective, from your research field, how would you answer the same question about what story do we tell? Is it a success story or not, or is it something harder to describe? Please.
Yes, hello everybody. Once again, I'm happy to be on that panel and to be able to address some of the issues that have been addressed and which are manifested also in the governance and policy and politics of the of regionalism in the Baltic Sea region. This is my field, and answering directly the question whether it's a success story or not, or what kind of story it is, I think I would share the conviction or the opinion that has just been passed by Michael a moment before, that, well, it is a mix of success. There is disappointment, and I would add a third element. There is a number of unintended effects, which may leave us with hope. And I will try to address these three issues while I speak. And the first one being the success, and of course, in comparison to what we had in the region 30 years ago, there is a far greater awareness about the Baltic Sea region in Europe. And it goes without saying that the very legal enactment of the EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region puts it on more secure grounds than it used to be in the beginning of the 1990s in all respect. And I will just remind you that the EU strategy addresses or has a number of priorities. It's got the famous Save the Sea, within which most of the speakers so far have addressed the challenges and opportunities. It addresses also Connect the Region priority, and it addresses the third priority, which I think is quite important as well, which is increase prosperity. And of course, how you are going to go about it and you use this opportunity that the greater awareness about Baltic affairs has been on the European mind is another matter. But we've got some kind of an institutional and ideational framework, scaffold for whatever we are doing in the Baltic Sea region. the great advantage in comparison to what we had 30 years ago is the number of institutions. There are institutions that articulate interests and challenges. There are NGOs. Well, there is Union of Baltic Cities. There is also a number of institutions that organize formal collaboration and cooperation. It's like a CBSS, Council of the Baltic Sea States. There is a, well, political body that possibly can address the issues. And there are, last but not least, as a great success, a number of institutions that provide what I call epistemic foundations of Baltic Sea regionalism or regionness, increasing regionness in the Baltic Sea region. And there is BUP, of course, and the national centers who do the job. There is Center for Baltic and East European Studies that does the job. There is the Baltic Sea Center at Stockholm University, but there are also quite a number of other institutions doing what they call Scandinavian studies and Baltic studies or Baltic Sea region studies around the Baltic Sea, which address not only the marine issues and environmental issues, but also cultural foundations of the Baltic Sea regionalism, history and political regionalism. So I think this is all something that we didn't have 30 years ago and we have now, which we should be very happy about. Then there comes the story about disappointment. And I think what I see as a disappointment in general, and especially when I talk to students in a course which I teach on a yearly basis, which is called Politics in the Baltic Sea Region, I see that there is a missing popular support and recognition of Balticness as an identification pattern, something that we could aspire to, right? Something that the young people could aspire to. And this missing support and recognition has many reasons, but it can be somehow helped, alleviated, improved by education. And here is a great role for the Baltic University program still to exist. This is already sort of jumping to the question what you could do in the future, but definitely that's a problem. And I see it as a disappointment that it hasn't been created yet, a critical mass of identification. Then there is, on the other hand, unpredictability and uncertainty that hasn't disappeared. And I think that's a great problem. Lars has spoken about it, that perhaps about 2010, he thought it would be pointless to talk about uncertainty and predictability because we would be living happily ever after in the Baltic Sea region. It hasn't taken place. The states, especially the bigger ones, are more vocal about articulating their national interests rather than transnational interests. They are willing to give more prominence to transnational solutions, transnationalism in general. And there is a third disappointment, which I would point at, which is uneven economic development of the region still, which puts, of course, richer economies in an advantageous position when we are talking about influence on the regional knowledge creation, what I call knowledge regime, what we come to consider as important, so to speak, in the region. This is not defined by those who don't have the resources or means, but this is defined by those who have the printing houses, have the media communication, and so on and so forth. I think this imbalance still exists in the Baltic Sea region. And then there is the third element, which I have addressed, which is the, well, I would say advantage of unintended effects that we have. A great thing which has happened and which is a fact is the socialization of elites from both sides of the former Cold War divide. I think people have learned to talk to each other. People have learned to communicate. There is a communication between students, teachers, elites, and an understanding that despite differences in values, you can talk to each other. This is, normally you think that it's only when you speak the same language, you speak the same, you are on the same wavelength, so to speak, you can communicate. But here there is, I think, a broad understanding for difference being possible and still being able to communicate. I think that I will stop here. Perhaps I will come back to some of those issues later on. But well, success, disappointment, and then a number of unintended effects. Us being able to now being online across the Baltic Sea, despite the national differences and despite the distance, I think this is also an unintended effect in a way. Thank you.
Thank you, Kazimierz. In a way, you're both sort of addressing paradoxes, or maybe disappointments is actually a better word, because Mikael, I mean, you talk about this gap between, I mean, it seemed to be easy enough to agree on certain goals, right? But on the other hand, when it comes to political decisions, a completely different story. And of course, Mikael, you mentioned reasons for that it has to do with cross-country decisions, has to do with decisions that concerns a number of different policy fields, so it's more complicated. And you, Kazimierz, you talk about this disappointment in the sense that, as you say, now we have a much stronger institutional framework, so we should expect more action. But on the other hand, there's a lack of a regional common identity, which then makes it a bit harder, I guess, to identify certain problems as common. This is our problem, we should solve them together. So there you have another paradox in a way. And I was meaning to ask you something about optimism or pessimism, but there was a lot of optimism in the 1990s for sure, when the whole Baltic University program was set up, even if there's a longer prehistory, as Lars talked about in the introduction. But if we focus a bit on optimism then, to start with at least, I would turn to you, Mikael, again. Are there some examples that you can sort of give us where there are certain problems or issues in the Baltic Sea that seem to be less complicated to deal with? There's stronger agreement on that we can set up some common governance regime for this problem. And if some of these are easier, if there are such examples, would you say something about why these things would be easier?
Well, it feels like an almost impossible task here to pick examples in this very complex landscape of things. But I think you're asking for like good examples, yeah, of things that have happened, I guess, and why that is the case. And I mean, if we look at these classical examples that we have, which are perhaps, let's say, DDT or something. I'm maybe too young to know exactly what happened at that. But I mean, what happened was that there was a very strong agenda setting of an issue that was that some problem was identified. And it was put very quickly on the agenda, and there was a window of opportunity to enforce that, to regulate that particular chemical group. And maybe it was because the force put by the market actors was not so strong to delay the action. But I can't really, I mean, this is more, it's very much, I mean, that's the problem with these wicked problems that we're talking about, that it's so much context dependent. I mean, there are things that are somehow generally needed. We need to have a science support. There needs to be some, if not consensus, some sort of closure of identifying that there is a problem, and some support of that action is needed. There needs to be ideas of what can be done. There needs to be some sort of process where this problem and what can be done is discussed, so that there is some sort of agreement in society that we want to sort of push some particular action. And now it feels like I'm just sort of dancing around the issue here. But my example would be some of these classical contaminants. I think that obviously, I mean, if you look at eutrophication and you look at the agreement on to divide up nutrient reduction needs among the different countries in this 2007 Baltic Sea Action Plan that was driven by scientific scenario building and which helped them to facilitate a very conflictual negotiation among the different countries. I mean, that needs to be seen as a sort of success. The problem with eutrophication is naturally that it's proven to be much harder to implement those agreements in later stages of the policy cycle. So in that case, I mean, there was a very sort of a fantastic success in one part here, but now it seems hard to fully implement, you know, the negotiated reductions. But maybe it's best if I'll let you distribute the word again here.
Okay, thank you. I mean, this is directly related to even if you do research in slightly different fields. I mean, you are interested in the role of expert knowledge, right, and its possible impacts on political decisions and politics. From your point of view, Kazimierz, can you? Doesn't have to be optimistic things, but how do you see that happens? I mean, examples of when you have expert knowledge in the field and then something actually happens, or if it doesn't happen, why not? Again, it's a very, very difficult question, of course, but you can answer it, you know, if you ask some examples if you want to.
I'll try. I mean, if this question is very difficult, sometimes it can be answered in a short and a long way. And of course, in a long way, there would be a number of different obstacles that we could define and say why the good thought and good ideas and good deeds don't materialize, don't translate into political action quickly. But I think if you look at the study how the institutions have reacted to certain popular movements in the Baltic Sea region, to certain issues that have been raised, at what time they have been raised, you can talk about a certain structural predictability of chance for success in such actions. And I have worked with two different agendas. One was to look at the role of the so-called epistemic communities, that is to say, the professionals who are recognized, have expertise, competence, and who at one time or another are allowed or empowered to address a policy area or issue, and their ideas become dominant, become, so to speak, hegemonic in the field of politics. When does it happen? This was one of the questions that has bothered me when I started looking into it. And there are two conditions, as I see, to that, or two answers to that question. One is a window of opportunity, but not just a window of opportunity, but a political window of opportunity that has to be there for a critical juncture to start doing wonders and for the ideas to materialize into political actions. And the political window of opportunity can also be sped up by a growing public awareness about an issue, right? For instance, climate change and what Greta Thunberg did for understanding of how important dealing with climate change is something, well, that you don't get even if you have a regular meeting of a politician on a weekly basis with his electorate, because there must be some kind of an emotion as well involved. So there must be a political window of opportunity which is supported by the growing public awareness, and then you have a chance for the experts, for the coalition of experts and network of epistemic communities to enter. And then there is a certain, I would say, opportunity, but perhaps just a way to make changes on scientific basis in the political decisions, which is at the time of a very dramatic change. what the political sciences call punctuation of the equilibrium, right? So when a punctuation of an equilibrium happens, which means that there is a changed political awareness about the issue area, then, well, there is a vacuum of ideas. Then the politicians usually are at loss. And just a very palpable example which you have in hand is the period between 1989 and 92. This was a typical punctuation of the then reigning equilibrium. There was a critical juncture, the fall of the old logic of organizing the environment, the international environment, and of the bipolar world. Many actors and stakeholders appeared. They started articulating their interest much louder. They were allowed to articulate their interest. So this dramatic change has caused a possibility, an opening, so to speak, for action. And then if you have a ready-made scenario, what you would like to do and how you would like to do it, then you are a winner. I will stop here, and then perhaps we'll come back to that if you want further examples for that. But anyway, critical junctures, either because there is a political window of opportunity or there is something unpredictable. I mean, COVID at the moment is that kind of unpredictable cause that may bring about tremendous changes in the recognition of scientific knowledge, again, as something valid for the social development.
Thank you, Kazimierz. Very interesting. I have one. We didn't have too much time. I mean, these sort of questions could be debated for a rather long time, obviously. But I have one final question, and it's about the future and how you sort of think about it from your perspectives and your respective fields. Again, I wanted to bring up something about being an optimist or being a pessimist, but I do research on public opinion, you know, and you should never give the individuals too many response categories, because then everybody will go for the middle alternative. So I will ask it in a different way. I will ask you, when you think about the future and the possibilities for future cooperation in the region, would you say that you're more optimistic or more pessimistic? And some sort of justification for that choice. Very, very, very briefly. Mikael, please.
It feels like we're doing an interview here. I think it can change depending on mood. And I think this sort of being positive or negative is a sort of a personal quality. I tend to be sort of positive, I think, to see that look what we have done, and there are opportunities to improve the situation further. So yes, overall, yeah, I think our region has good potential to keep our environment and our life together with the environment at least in a situation that moves towards sustainability. But at the same time, yeah, if the other side is that obviously there will be new challenges, we don't really know how our societies will develop. If we look at the environmental part, I mean, there are obviously it's a very crowded sea, and it's becoming even more crowded. So I think this, especially in this wider sustainability agenda, I think how that will play out is I think an open question where we need to be vigilant and search for innovative new approaches. And there I think also from the research side, I think there will be substantial needs for research and expert systems to adapt to in some cases when we are looking at natural resources. I think we need to take a step back sometimes and especially maybe natural scientists, which are often the powerful actor in these cases. I think there needs to be more room for social and humanities, but also to explore different sustainabilities is a question here, to talk about, and there I think that science has often, naturally with good intent, is taking the position of one side of the argument in many of these cases. If we look at fisheries, for instance, which is a fundamentally complex and conflictual type of issue, depending on where you are in science, you will look at this more as or mostly as an environmental problem. But naturally from the sector, it's a cultural and societal economic welfare type of problem for people that are working in that sector. And those things are, I mean, they will continue to be deeply conflictual in how we try to navigate towards a better future.
Thank you. Thank you. So finally then, Kazimierz, the same question to you. You mentioned this wish, at least, that maybe even the COVID-19 situation would be an opportunity for us to sort of try to strengthen that research or expert knowledge should be taken more seriously. But how do you feel about the future?
Well, there is an unconditioned pessimism and conditioned optimism, I would say. And if I want to address the optimistic scenarios and what one should be optimistic about, is that so much has been done with respect to infrastructure in the Baltic Sea region already. I think the future will depend, and depends already now to a great extent, on the IT infrastructure that has improved tremendously. And I think this gives hope for the future. And I'm not talking about achievement in artificial intelligence, but just the ways, the means of communications that we now have that are so much greater than they used to be in the past. Even 5 years ago, just organizing a conference like this would have been very challenging. It was reserved for the top secret services or national governments. Now it has democratized our access to the scientific knowledge, to the public communication. And I think this gives a lot of hope. There is a condition, of course, that it should be further developed and not limited, not censored. Goes without saying. I think on the when saying that there is a challenge that may have detrimental effect on this optimistic communication opportunity, it is the growing rhetoric of competing or competition states, which are spelling out all possible institutions and things in a national way, or with an outlook to the national interests rather to the transnational interest. And I think Baltic Sea region issues can only be addressed in a transnational institutions and organizations, which is very difficult to do when you have this competition state rhetoric dominating in many states of the Baltic Sea region. There is optimism when it comes to the agency of certain actors. Agency meaning the empowerment to institutionalize certain issues and valid for everybody. And I have already mentioned the Council of the Baltic Sea States, which is a resource that is not being used optimally yet. And I think I would very much like to see this taking a much more active role in furthering certain Baltic Sea region issues and furthering dialogue. I think dialogue, not of many more participants, many more, as we say, stakeholders of the Baltic Sea regionalism is necessary, especially a dialogue of young people. And this goes all the way down to the primary school and making them aware of living in a region that is a specific Baltic Sea bound region. And so that their identity discourses will be different from the older generations who saw the dividing lines rather than what is a common good. Perhaps this dialogue of the young people gives me the greatest hope, because I see a number of initiatives at the moment which supports that kind of communication pattern. And only yesterday I have delivered a Horizon project which is to address the mini publics with the inclusion of the young people. Hopefully we will be able to do that. But it gives an example of how the future does not need to be defined negatively, but positively. And we have certain conditions, but we are able to overcome it. And we should, well, give some trust to the institution, provide more of the transnational rhetoric, and empower the young people.
Thank you very much, Kazimierz. Mikael, Gilek, Kazimierz Musiał, thank you very much for this nice discussion. It was very interesting. We're supposed to end this day at 16:15. So in this last few seconds, let me just say a large thank you to the Uppsala Secretariat for the Baltic University program for helping us organizing this event. Especially I would like to thank Madeleine Granvik and Pontus Ambros. But also I would like to thank all the presenters here today for their very interesting presentations. And I would like to thank the audience, of course, for attending. With that, we can finish, but maybe Madeleine or Pontus, are there something else we should add?
Thank you yourself, Joakim, for participating and contributing and hosting this first Space Bridge. And thank you all colleagues, and I hope that we could also see each other then the 18th of February, because that will be the next Space Bridge hosted by the Belarusian State University. So I look forward to that. Okay, but see you soon again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.